So this is to help those of you who want help in your respiratory system diagram, and then also in the definitions of what everything is. So I'm going to do my best to draw, but I gotta tell you, whatever I can draw using my mouse on my computer, believe me, you can do better. So this is obviously a picture here of an actual person's respiratory system. Here's your little body outline. And I think it's easiest if you sort of pull back your circulatory system diagram so that you're just focusing on the outline and your own piece of plastic. So we're actually going to start right here. This is nasal cavity, but it's okay to say the nose. That's fine. So really the respiratory system starts with kind of your nose and also your mouth. So there we have your nose and your mouth. And those both go back into a pipe or an opening here called the pharynx. Okay, so I'm going to kind of make this go down to here and down to here, and then I would label it pharynx. Okay, so I'm not actually going to write that out, but here's the word right here, pharynx. So go ahead and pause the video and do that. So then after the pharynx, there's a part, so, well, we'll actually talk about all of the different functions in a second. But then after the pharynx, at the top of the trachea, or what we call the windpipe, right here, kind of in the neck, is what we would call the larynx. So I'm going to kind of do this, and then again, I would label that larynx. So there's larynx right here. So go ahead and pause the video and draw in your larynx and then label that. And then down into the chest is a long opening, and that's called the trachea. So there's the trachea, and this is how it's spelled, trachea, right there. And again, go ahead and label that so that you know what it's called, because otherwise you're just going to be looking at like a long snake-like thing going down in the middle. And the trachea branches out into the two lungs. So here are the lungs, and you can even put kind of little branches here. But then the two lungs, one kind of comes up like that, and the other kind of goes like that. And see, we're not caring so much about how it looks, but then label that lungs. So you have two lungs. So we go from the nose and the mouth to the pharynx, to the trachea, to the larynx. I'm sorry, to the larynx. Let me say that again. Goes from the nose and the mouth to the pharynx, then to the larynx, then to the trachea, and finally into the lungs. All right, so let's now look at what all of these different things do. So looking at the specific organs. So the nose and mouth, we understand that's where the air comes in and where it goes out. It's kind of the boundary between the outside world and your body. Food also goes in your mouth, and that's important in a minute because it's not part of the respiratory system. But in the pharynx, that's the area after the nose and mouth, and both air and food travel here. So they both are in the same place at either the same or different times. But that's how you can end up choking. If the food goes into the wrong part, it ends up going down towards the lungs. That's what choking is. And that's why choking is a problem, because both food and air are in the pharynx. And there's a little part at the top of the pharynx called an epiglottis. Think of it as a little flap. And when there's air going in and out, your epiglottis is open, so the air goes in and out through the larynx. But if you're trying to talk as you're eating, air's going in and out, and so the epiglottis is open, and that can allow food to fall down into your larynx. That's why it's so dangerous to talk with your mouth full. Also, it's gross. So that's the pharynx. The pharynx is that area where both air and food travel. Then you have the trachea. So I'm actually skipping the larynx. So if you look at your picture, you'll notice it actually goes pharynx, larynx, trachea, but I'm going to skip the larynx for a minute, and I'll explain why in a second. Your trachea is also called your windpipe. So if you, sometimes if you're choking on something, especially like a little water or something, people will say, oh, did it go down the wrong pipe? That's what they're talking about. They're talking about, did it go down your trachea into your windpipe? And this is where air only, unless you're choking, travels down to the lungs and up from the lungs. So then is the larynx. Now remember, the larynx actually comes between the trachea and the pharynx, but I wanted to explain what the trachea was first, because the larynx, I like to say, is at the top of the trachea, and if you don't know what the trachea is, then the larynx doesn't help. And that's also called the voice box. So in order to talk, you need to force air across the larynx, and that helps you make sound. It's also, if you swallow, you can sort of feel something going up and down in your throat. That's your larynx. By the way, you should be pausing this in between each one of these bullet points to stop and write this down in your journal. If you haven't done that, then what you want to do is rewind the video to the start or pause it right now and write this down. But I think it's easiest to write one down and then listen to what I have to say about the next one, and then stop and write that one down, and then listen to what I have to say about the next one. So that way you can start to make the connections, and you're not just writing words down, you're writing ideas. And then last but not least are the lungs. The lungs are one of the largest organs, and all animals have, well, actually that's not true, not all animals, all mammals, so humans or mammals, have lungs. Birds have lungs as well. So the lungs are one of the largest organs in the human body, the skin really being the largest, but the lungs are one of the largest. And the whole point of the lungs is it's where oxygen and carbon dioxide pass either into the rest of the body or come out of the rest of the body. So oxygen we breathe in from the air. It goes down through the pharynx and the larynx and trachea, and then from the lungs it can go out into the rest of the body. And then carbon dioxide is collected in the lungs and goes back up through the trachea, then larynx, pharynx, and then out through your nose and mouth. So when people talk about we breathe in oxygen and we breathe out carbon dioxide, what they mean is, or where that exchange happens is in the lungs. So now this gives you a sense of what all of the organs of the respiratory system are, and I helped you understand how to draw it. But now you have a supplemental question. So if you are not doing honors, then your question is to explain what the overall purpose or function of the respiratory system is. If you are doing honors, then what you need to do is you need to look at how the respiratory system interacts with the circulatory system that we just did. Okay, so you can go ahead and do that and make sure you write it in your journal, and then you're done.